Will Dogman inherit the Earth? Dear Scary Stories NYC, I was extremely disturbed by your recent episode concerning Dogman creatures taking up habitation inside the once great city of Detroit. I am a Michigander as well, and I am sick to my stomach about what has been happening to our beloved state. There is nothing that we residents of Michigan cannot overcome when we stick together, but this Dogman situation has reached a crisis because we can't even come to an agreement about whether the Dogman even exists at all. I would like to tell you about my personal experiences and those of my close friends and relatives, and then I hope you will humor me and continue to listen as I propose a solution to some of these issues. Now, my family doesn't live in Detroit and hasn't for 2 generations, but that doesn't mean I don't care. We're mostly up further north around Shepherd, Michigan, but believe you me, we've had a Dogman problem up here since long before it stretched down south to Detroit. The most recent sighting I've had was the most traumatic to me personally, because I was driving along Coleman Road to pick up my granddaughter from daycare when it happened. The idea of these creatures lurking around human settlements, and especially around our children, is terribly upsetting and quite alarming. Granted, I was still a few minutes of driving away from where my granddaughter's daycare was, but I hope you don't think it outrageous that this would concern me. One of my favorite things from when I was a child until now about this part of the world is how we are surrounded by trees and forest. It always used to feel good to be so close to nature, to be blanketed in it year-round. These days, with the legendary mountain monsters straying too far from their traditional homes and winding up in and around my neighbors, nature doesn't feel as much like a comforter keeping us warm as it does a plastic bag over our face, suffocating our entire way of life. So I was driving along a part of the road that has very tall grass growing up along the side. Almost looks like wheat or something. It's a few feet tall. I'm saying this because that's what I drove into when I swerved to avoid hitting the big, hairy, dog-headed muscle man who bounced out into the road in front of me that afternoon. This was the most ridiculously overpumped steroid freak of all time, with big dog ears and a long snaggle-toothed snout. It was like the Hulk turned into a werewolf on the full moon. It had to be over 7 feet tall. I think it was much taller than that. I've never seen a man as tall as this thing, nor have I seen a man outside of a superhero movie that was this jacked. It didn't matter how much fur he was covering it with. You could see he was a massive moving wall of muscle. I sat in my stalled car, grateful that I hadn't driven headlong into a tree, staring at the beast man who had caused my accident. I felt like lecturing him about looking both ways before you cross, which is sort of a crazy thing to be thinking. I just got the scare of my life. I got run off the road by a literal monster. Here I was thinking superior thoughts. I glared at the monster as it gazed back at me, confused. I don't think it knew what to make of me until that moment I glared at it, which was me informing the beast that he and I were enemies. That is not a good thing to cause an animal to feel, as it turns out. The beast charged toward me with a similar gait to that which my mother used to use when she was walking over to give me a slap or a spanking. I instinctively knew I was in it deep, and I rolled up all the windows and double-checked that my doors were locked. The Dogman fell upon my car, beating on it with the sides of his hand-like paws. I tried to focus on turning the key in the engine and restarting the car, but my hands were shaking so badly that it looked as though I had palsy. Seeing that I wouldn't look at him, the creature leaped on my hood and banged on the front windshield. I was whimpering and crying and failing over and over again to get that engine started. The Michigan Dogman was on my hood, trying desperately to get me to look at it. I knew if I did that I would be frozen like a deer in the headlights, so I kept my head down and my eyes averted, praying for the car to start up again so I could go get my grandkid and return to my normal life. At this point, that creature began jumping up and down on the hood, causing the car to rock as though we were on the high seas. I started to feel nauseous, and that made me angry. The anger, I think, helped me break out of my icy, constricting fear, and that was when I turned the key, and that engine, for whatever reason, actually started. I put the car in reverse and jerked it back as suddenly as I could, resulting in that Dogman flipping, butt upward, falling backward into the tall grasses. I pulled onto the road, put the car in gear, and then sped off, leaving my hairy adversary in the dirt. My granddaughter noticed I had been crying when I picked her up, but I told her they were tears of happiness because I was just so glad to see her again. That was in fact the truth, although only part of it. So I know of multiple sightings over by Chippewa and East River roads and the woods around that area. The Chippewa River flows through the forest, then continues along the northern edge of that golf course over there. I feel strongly that the Dogman is among a number of animals that will stick fairly close to the Chippewa River to stay hydrated all day while hunting, or all night if they're truly nocturnal. I also feel that the creature is an opportunist, equally ready to work days or nights, depending on what luck he has been having in hunting, and how hungry he is that day. All of my sightings, most of which were not nearly as exciting as the recent one I just described to you, were during the daytime hours, with only one occurring around sunset. Granted, I'm rarely outside at night any longer, but surely the animal cannot be purely nocturnal. Otherwise, logically, I'd have never seen it at all. So a friend of mine was camping on his relative's land right over there by the Chippewa River, basically across the street from the golf course, you might say. He was doing this minimalist camping thing that seems to be catching on, where he didn't build a fire and he didn't pitch a tent, but he just slept in a sleeping bag in a tiny space between trees in the middle of the woods over there. I told him several times that I felt he was crazy to do things like that, and even crazier to do them alone. But this only seemed to encourage him to do it more. He enjoys shocking me. So imagine how truly shocked I was when he came back to tell me that I was probably right all along, and he probably shouldn't have given me such a hard time about it. It turns out that he earned himself a face-to-face meeting with the Dogman, and this had him looking at the entire world in a new way. He really seemed shaken down to the core, and his personality was drastically changed. He had become very humble. It only lasted about a month before his ego returned, but for a while there, this dude was shell-shocked. He had post-traumatic Dogman disorder, for real. Here's the story he told me about why he was so shaken up. Okay, so he was sleeping under the trees in his sleeping bag, back to the ground, and belly up toward the stars. He was enjoying all his dreams, and snoring and whatnot, when suddenly, his face was being tickled. He was too sleepy to really even wonder if it was a dream or real, or what the difference was between the two. He swatted at the front of his face like you would at a small flying insect, thinking that must be what was tickling him. Only his hand hit something large, making a slapping sound. This was quickly followed by a growling sound and the odor of extremely bad breath. So when he opened his eyes, he basically saw teeth, carnivore teeth, and he felt his face being tickled by dog whiskers. He had been being smelled by a very large dog as he slept. It tickled him awake as it sniffed away. This dog was huge, and he had him pinned. Having literally nothing he could do except lie there and hope for the best, my friend laid there and hoped for the best. The dog continued to growl while my friend tried not to cry. After that, the dog growled and it growled and it growled. And also, it drooled, with the drool dripping onto my friend's face. That made it even harder to lay there unmoving, although that certainly didn't stop him from doing just that. He had some strong motivation, with dog teeth, half the height of his head, staring at him in the eyes. Finally satisfied that my friend was completely submissive to him, the dog leaned back and rose in the air. Higher, higher, until he was impossibly high, making my friend wonder if he was dreaming all of this. He was seeing a 7 or 8 foot tall dogman, or dog-headed man. The creature was bipedal, and my friend had to look a long way up to still see his head. Clearly bored with my friend, the dogman walked off to find more important things to do. My friend told me that creature carried himself like he was a boss. He acted like this was his forest, so you had to play by his rules. One of the guys I used to work for a few jobs back once got tipsy at an office Christmas party and told me about seeing the dogman at his country club while he was playing golf. He said there was one patch of trees on the course where a very large dog would sometimes run out from and grab your golf ball, then run back into the trees. This creature was so large that none of the golfers wanted to go into those woods to retrieve their ball. They would just use another ball, placing it at a spot both agreed that the previous ball had been before being taken by the oversized canine. One day, a guy who had lost more than one ball to that dog already decided that enough was enough. He said, "It's only a dog," and he charged over to that small grove of trees, intending to march in there and get everyone's balls back. Well, as he reached the edge of the woodline, out walked that big dog. Only he walked out like a man on his hind legs. He walked up to this dude, looked down at him from his great height, with this expression on his face like, "What do you want?" And that tiny little 6 foot tall man turned around and walked away just as fast as he had walked up, maybe more so. In other words, that wasn't just a dog. It was a dog that was oversized and capable of walking around upright on its hind legs. Sound familiar? A cousin of mine who said I could use her first name Elizabeth actually moved to Milwaukee to get away from one particular dogman who followed her home from camping one time. Sort of like a ghost attachment, you might say. She and her husband would see it lurking around their property at night, and it led to quarreling within their family. Elizabeth said her husband reacted like he was jealous of the dogman, which made no sense to her at that time or now. Instead of being supportive as she was getting stalked by a predatorial cryptid, he seemed convinced that she had given the dogman some reason to be so interested in her. Their marriage was on the rocks, and so Elizabeth went to stay with her mother, who is my aunt. Well, once she got there, the house started getting pelted with rocks at night, or at least that's what it sure sounded like. Nobody ever saw it happen, but you couldn't help but hear the banging. When you'd look outside, well, yes, there would be rocks on the ground, but how could anyone tell if any of those had been thrown up on the roof? For all they knew, the rocks were falling out of heaven. They literally couldn't tell. That didn't stop anyone from wondering if the dogman had followed Elizabeth to her mother's home. They all visualized the dogman, or possibly several of them, hurling rocks at their roof. Elizabeth said the only way to make it stop was for her to go outside and look around. She was convinced the thing wanted her to come outside so it could look at her some more. If she walked around for a good minute before going back, then the banging would stop for at least the rest of that night, and sometimes for a couple or 3 days. Since nobody had actually seen the creature at the new location, there was not a true sense of alarm about these strange happenings. One morning when Elizabeth rose at dawn to start driving to a business meeting she had at a somewhat great distance later that day, she was so surprised she almost fell over backward by a dogman who had been hiding behind her car. The way it happened was that Elizabeth was looking through her bag trying to find her fob to unlock her vehicle. She wasn't really watching where she was going because she thought she was the only person there in that location. When she clicked the fob and the car made its little noise to tell her that it was unlocked, a huge, as in 8 or 9 foot tall, hairy, man-like canine bounced up from where it had been squatting and hiding behind her rear bumper. How it had made that immense form small enough to fit behind her rear fender unseen, she could not explain to me, but that was what she said happened. Fortunately for her, the creature was spooked and it ran away into bushes that lead toward the neighborhood park. If it had jumped toward her to attack, Elizabeth admitted to me that she would not have known what to do, and she would have been unable to defend herself. Realizing this, she no longer felt safe at her mother's place, and she resolved to relocate to a city. As I said before, she now lives in Milwaukee, where she says everything's been fine so far. She has always assumed that the city was too populated for the Dogman to ever put in an appearance. This is why we both reacted with sadness and alarm to your recent episode about the Dogman invading the city of Detroit. No offense to whomever gave you that one, but I sure hope it is not true. I don't want to think that it's gotten that bad over there, because then things might get really bad up here. Possibly it's becoming time to get serious about this and develop a more effective strategy for dealing with all aspects of the phenomenon. I think we can probably all agree that nothing meaningful can get done concerning this issue until it has been proven without any remaining doubt that the Dogman is in fact a real species. Since they are disinclined to want to be identified, there must be a concerted effort made by both government and educational institutions to track the creature down and identify its DNA. Until this can be achieved, the various problems attached to Dogman infestation will continue to multiply and fester. Now, what we would do about the Dogman once we knew for a fact it was provably real, I can't predict. I don't think it's very fruitful to even concern ourselves with that part of it until the animal is proven to exist. Now, I know there are plenty of people who feel the Dogman is both real and not real, or that it can pop into and out of our reality. I am not arguing with those people, as they may turn out to be correct in the long run. Obviously, if something like this explains the situation, then we aren't going to be able to solve these problems through government intervention. I suppose if Dogman turns out to be something extra-dimensional or intra-dimensional, then we'd probably be better off praying for help than asking the government. But if we presume Dogman to be real in a conventional way, and if we see the current global trends concerning actions being taken which have already cut deeply into the human population of Earth, then we see an obvious trend. As our population drops quickly and drastically, so too is theirs growing. It sounds laughable right now to discuss Dogman becoming more populous than humans, but to mock me means missing the main point. The Dogmen are predators. They don't need to outnumber you to wipe you out. There are always fewer predators to more grazers in the world, but those few predators need a very, very large herd to feed on. We humans only hold the top position on the food chain for two reasons: our technology and our huge numbers. Those who think they are wise are trying to engineer a huge drop in human population while assuming that our technology will keep us on top of the food chain. But what if that is an invalid assumption? What if we can only stay the rulers of this world if we continue to grow our population. What if depopulation means the discontinuance of our survival? I can tell you one thing for sure. There are other species who are noticing that we are displaying weakness. They are noticing holes in our defenses, and they are increasingly penetrating our borders and living off of our excesses. They're ready to take over, in my opinion, because if we aren't a lot more careful, Dogman will inherit the earth. Some peeps are erudite and clarsy, while others are difficult to parsy. Then there are those who are just a farcy, but none compare to Deborah Darcy. Please join us in thanking Deborah of RC Deborah Darcy for rejoining our channel memberships. She gets to see all our weekly secret uncensored stories, and we get to stay on the air a little while longer. Here to explain how you can help us survive and what cool stuff you get in return is our international TV spokesmongrel, Henrey Lee Dogman. Hank? Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.